I think when you add in everything that America does well, the one thing that we do well is apparently kill folk. And we do well in terms of making certain that individuals have access to firearms. And so by making certain that individuals have firearms at the ready and can get as many as they want and can have an open carry to carry them wherever and however they choose to, then we create situations that lead to the violence that we are seeing. Welcome to another episode of I Take Your Point. I'm John Dunson, joined today by my lovely co-host, Miss Lynn. How are you doing today?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm always better than I deserve. How was your week?
It was good. My weekend?
Your week. I don't care about your week.
Oh, my week. Yeah. So I was traveling. Good trip. The weekend was great. It was all well. Thank you. And you?
Good. It was a good week. I can't complain. All right. We had a lot going on this week. I want to talk about is some comments that we got regarding the last episode and some feedback in terms of the structure of the podcast and how we try to make it so that it's easier for our listeners to follow what it is that we're doing. We do appreciate the comments privately that we're getting and publicly that we're getting and know that we're doing our best to get better in every episode. We'll tune in, like, comment, and share. And if you are not already subscribed to the podcast, please take the time to do so. Even listening for 5 minutes will help us. That said, today, let's talk about violence in America. And we have to start with what has transpired, not just this week, but we have to think about it with respect to why it is that America finds itself where it is. We can no longer have political discourse or even random discourse, it seems, in this country without it being something different or turning into something different. It feels like we are all clashing about something. We can't be a Republican. We can't be a Democrat. It used to be that if you were a Republican, it did not define all of who you are or were. If you were a Democrat, it did not define all of who you are or were. It was just a part of who you are or were. Now we see it tearing apart families, friendships, and relationships that were 20, 30, 40 years old. I'm always fascinated when we think about America at this point, how we got here, and more importantly, what we're going to do to try to make certain that we're able to move forward. Looking at the scenes of last week, one of the things that jumped out to me with respect to America, violence and politics specifically was, you go back to probably 07, 08. And the election of Barack Hussein Obama and how that election, in my opinion, broke a good portion of America. Because in theory, America was supposed to be this melting pot where everyone could put aside their ideologies and vote for the most qualified candidate, regardless of whether or not that candidate was a Republican or Democrat. But Obama tested that. He tested what some progressives considered to be their ideologies, that they would look at individuals for who it is that they say they were. It tested some Republicans from the standpoint that they started looking and really questioning what qualified in their mind was and whether or not qualified you could be qualified if you were not a cis white male. And so everyone that fell outside of that circle was deemed unqualified. And I think the first time that I saw it on display was, we go back to the great state of South Carolina. And I believe Representative Joe, I can't remember his name, he was a representative from South Carolina. And I remember Obama was given the State of the Union address and he yelled out, "You lie." And you had that happen on the floor of the House of Representatives. And then you had the Tea Party and individuals in the Tea Party who were talking about taking our country back and things of that sort. One could not associate the play on words there, taking our country back, especially when the person who they were talking about taking it back from was an individual who looked different from them. So you talk about that toxic polarization in terms of rhetoric and in terms of actions on one side. Republicans can say that that's also happened on the left, where Dems or progressives or liberals, however you want to identify yourself, were also using words that were insightful. And so let's start there. What say you about that?
And the representative that you were referring to is Joe Wilson, from apparently your great state of South Carolina, which again is debatable, but we will hold that off. So I think that when you think about Joe Wilson and other people in Congress that were so disrespectful to Obama, we hadn't seen that before. Like, I remember when Bush was president, and coworker and I had traveled to Germany, and it was right after 9/11. And so he was talking about Angela Merkel and her presidency. And then he made some derogatory remarks about Bush. And neither my coworker or myself voted for Bush. We were not fans of Bush. But what we did say is that is our president. No matter what, we're American, that's our president, and that's disrespectful. And so I just remember that there was this pride in being an American and not Democrat or Republican or whatever. And I do have to agree with you that at some point, and maybe it was Obama, it became more about identity that if you are a Democrat, you are these things. If you are a Republican, you are these things. Not that this particular candidate aligned with certain parts of me and I'm going to vote this way. It just became that's who you are and that's how I'm going to label you. We go back to those labels. There was no room for nuance. There was no room for discord. There was no room for anything. I'm going to keep on going back to the media. I believe that the media found a niche and they were like, you know what, we can monetize this. And so we're going to exploit it. We're going to put on people that are not just telling them, forget Dan Rathers and Peter Jennings, those are gone. We're going to go and put in people that are, say, incendiary things, that are inciting things, that are making people move with emotion instead of thought. You talked about that Obama was unqualified. Of course, we know Obama is qualified. Everybody that can read knows on paper he is qualified. Of course that. But society moved from logical thinking and conversation to emotion. And when you start to operate on emotion and you're looking at that reptilian brain, there is no room for you to have any type of conversation that's going to invite something in that doesn't align with what you, like your confirmation bias or whatever you're thinking. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. I want to stay on the politics of the word usage, because one of the things that we have noticed over the last couple of years, that when you disagree with someone and you start throwing around terms such as evil, fascist, communist, things of that sort, and the individual who is now sitting in the White House has mastered those words to help demonize individuals that he doesn't agree with. So we become very tribal in terms of our political views. We do have individuals who specifically just identify that their politics is their primary identity. Everything else is secondary. And it used to not be that way, or at least we didn't allow it to be to the degree that it is now, where everyone is doing it. So that violent language that is utilized, words can only get you to a certain point. After you've said certain things and you put it out there, the next logical step is the physical violence. And so when you have events that happened with respect to violence in the political sphere, we see an uptick of violence, not only perpetrated against individuals who are public figures, but now individuals who are going about their day-to-day lives. One of the things that CNN did, I believe it was today or yesterday, they dropped an article that talked about the increase in political violence when individuals disagree with what it is that an individual may be saying or believing. And we can go back to the first assassination attempts against the shit show. And during that time, it was obviously running for re-election. We can also go back and talk about earlier this year, where you had Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania have a Molotov cocktail thrown at his house. We can talk about the representatives from Minnesota who were killed a couple months ago. They happened to be Democrats. We can talk about the individual who went in to United Healthcare and decided that he was going to gun down the CEO of United Healthcare. I take your point about the media, and we'll put on that for a couple of minutes, because I want to talk about how the media glorifies certain things. This week, we saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk as he was on a college campus giving a speech about his views. It seems to me that we're living in this moment where we are now transcending words, and we're now seeing in action individuals decide that they're going to commit violent acts against individuals who may disagree with them. We would be remiss if we did not point out what happened on January 6th and that event, and how those individuals who were adjudicated and found guilty of trying to overthrow their government, and the individuals who is sitting now in the office of the presidency of the United States, decided that he was going to pardon them and call them patriots. So that violence and those violent acts that we're seeing, all of it seems to have ratcheted up since 2010. we'd be foolish not to see the throughput of what happened in 2008 and where we are now, almost 20 years later. What say you?
Yeah, and so I do go back to the emotional responses. So they're twofold. First, if you use words to demonize a group of people, then you can justify your action because you're essentially dehumanizing them. And the other thing about that is that when you are operating with emotion and you're not using that like the neural cortex of your brain, you're not doing higher order thinking, questioning, being receptive to input, when you just operate in emotion, the next step is going to be violence. What I see is a lot of political people, a lot of the media, a lot of society is monetizing, and they're making a lot of money off of these words, using inflammatory rhetoric, get people to operate in a way where they're not thinking. They're not thinking about the throughput. The only people that are benefiting from that are the people that are using those words, not the people that shoot someone and then go to jail. Not the people that are throwing cocktails at people and, it upends their life. So the people that maybe sit in the Oval Office or sit in a media room that are allowing this rhetoric to continue, they keep profiting off of it. And no one is questioning it. They're just continuing to move in this direction instead of having a conversation about, well, let me hear you. Because not everything that somebody says, even if they disagree with you, is wrong. It's their perspective. And I think that we can make space to hear someone else's perspective. It may not change a dang thing about me. I may not change anything, but I can still give you the space and the grace for you to say what you have to say, because there is a reason why somebody says something. One of the things that you and I talked about, Gen Z, right? I'm always, yay, Gen Z. But there is this group of Gen Z, these angry white males. And I'm like, why are you so angry? So I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and she talked about because their legacy, they feel like their legacy is being taken away from them. And the funny thing about, not funny, haha, but funny, interesting way is that people will look at something someone says, like a Charlie Kirk, and they'll like, oh my God, I align with this. But they never think about his background. They never think about anything else. It was one soundbite, and they're like, my goodness, I must follow this person. You never take the time to understand how he got here, what his life is like. It may not align with you at all, but one soundbite, confirmation bias.
Yeah, I think you brought up two things that are interesting in terms of how we got here. One is the collapse of trust in terms of Gen Z not necessarily believing in the system and what it is and how it is that the system is currently set up to protect them, or they may disagree about how the system is structured, and they've lost trust or faith in the American political system in and of itself. The second part that you mentioned was individuals who can find someone who they agree with and latch on to that core component of what it is that they believe that they've heard from that individual. I think those two things, when you combine trust or lack of trust with, and I'm going to use technology here, with that radicalization with respect to online technology, and you finding your tribe of individuals who may agree with you, that I believe has been like an accelerant for us in this day, because I can get online and I can find individuals who hate certain things or who believe a certain way. In the past, I may not have been able to find those individuals. I may have thought I was a weirdo sitting here thinking that, okay, I'm the only one that thinks this way. But now I have little subgroups, your social ecosystems that will allow me to speak to like-minded evangelists, and we can all talk about is that the man, or how it is that, Black folk or gay folk or Jewish folk are all burdening us and taking things away from us. You talked about individuals feeling that their legacy was at stake. And specifically, we're talking about white males, because I think the data does show that when you think about the vast majority of mass shootings that occur in the United States, the data shows that 55% of those mass shootings are committed by folk who are white. The data also shows that a large percentage of those are white men between the ages of 22 and 34, early 30s. So the question then becomes, why are they so angry?
Well, I think that we, and I always talk about the collective, we kind of encourage this, and I always go back to COVID. I think that people think COVID happened, COVID's over, but there are ramifications from COVID. And so we think about 2 years, these kiddos were stuck online and they felt isolated. with a Google search, keyword search, some metadata, I can find like-minded people. If I'm not going out and I'm not hearing from other people in a classroom, or I'm not traveling to be exposed to new things, all I'm hearing is something that's reinforced to me over and over and over. And I know that sometimes you will say, like, it's the parents. The parents were also going through their own thing during COVID. So if I had my kiddo in a room and he or she was in a room for 2 hours and all they were doing was keyword searching and finding their like-minded people, that's all they heard. They weren't challenged. You know, I have this thing about either you need to go to college or you need to travel. Those you have options. Those are your two options. You can't just stay in Dillon, South Carolina and just do whatever you're doing there. I don't know what you're doing. Or Enid, Oklahoma. You can't do it. And so I think that it's more about exposing people to different ideas. And when they were going through COVID, and like I said, they found their echo chamber, that just became their truth. That
So
became
here's where I'm going to push back on that,
okay.
because this is a uniquely American problem. Yes, you do not see the number of mass shootings with young folk in other countries that you see in America. Other countries dealt with COVID.
Let me just challenge you and ask you for some data. How many other countries have access to the firearms that we have?
And that's the point that I wanted to get to. Thank you for making my point for me before I got a chance to.
Because
We
sometimes I can
have
make it better than you.
nice, nice. Well played. I think when you add in everything that America does well, the one thing that we do well is apparently kill folk. And we do well in terms of making certain that individuals have access to firearms. And so by making certain that individuals have firearms at the ready and can get as many as they want and can have an open carry to carry them wherever and however they choose to, then we create situations that lead to the violence that we are seeing. So all of those things, whether it's the toxicity in terms of our rhetoric, whether it's the radicalization in terms of being able to not see ourselves now as lone wolves, but to see ourselves as part of a tribe where we're able to talk to individuals who may be thinking like we're thinking, and whether or not we're able to have access to the firearms allows us to see where it is that we are with respect to this particular point with the violence in America and our political system. The part that I think hits close to home, I know for you, is when we think about violence in America, we have to talk about the fact that this occurred on a college campus. And so now we're having discussions about violence on college campuses and what that rhetoric looks like on college campuses and how it's impacting students. What say you about that?
Yeah, and it is worrisome. And for the last couple of episodes, my whole thing has been about my kiddo going off to college. So while I was traveling, I couldn't sleep. There was one night I just could not sleep. Happened to look down at my phone. My son was trying to reach me. And so I contacted him, and he was like, it was like 2 a.m, which granted, it's only 12 in Arizona. And so, one of the things I thought was so interesting is he's like, well, did you hear about Charlie Kirk? And I was like, why do you care about that at 2 a.m? And I have to remember that he is on a Christian campus in Arizona. And I was like, okay, so let's talk through this. How are you feeling? What's going on? He said, well, he goes, I think that it was culture shock for me to come on this campus and be around so many conservatives that aren't willing to have a conversation and the religious part. And I was like, dude, you pick this college. But okay, I hear what you're saying. And so we just kind of talked about how he's feeling, how he can navigate things, and making sure, again, that we're giving grace to space and space to people that may not think the same. He's like, well, they're trying to convert me. And I was like, right. I feel confident that you know who you are, but you also can take things away from people. You never know how someone's words can be utilized to either help someone else or help yourself. So just hear what they're saying, take what you want, leave the rest. But it is worrisome, especially being on that campus where there's a lot of conservatives. He said that they were praying and they were so upset, like this guy was the next Messiah. It was different. But the same thing was happening on the UT campus. And so I think that across the nation, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because again, you are in philosophy philosophy classes, you're in classes with all different types of people. You cannot say to the professor, oh, you know what, I don't want to be this person in my group. Yeah, that doesn't work like that. So you're going to have to figure out a way to navigate this and to complete projects and complete whatever assignments are in Canvas. I think it's going to be really interesting. Luckily, my son and I have a really great relationship where he shares things. So we'll see how it plays out, especially on a very, very conservative campus.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think back to my time in college, and it was a time for learning. It was a time for debating. And as you know, it was a time for discovery. And I had fun while on campus trying to do all of those things. The reason that I went to an HBCU was because it allowed me to do all of those things and not have to worry about shit. Some of the stuff that you would have to worry about if you possibly attended a PWI in terms of the racial overtones and things of that sort. So whether you're talking to a Jewish student and they're seeing the swastika that's posted or scrawled on a wall, or you're talking about an LGBTQI student and they're seeing homophobic slurs that are painted on the wall, or a Black student who's on the campus of a PWI and someone is telling them go back to Africa or throwing a banana or something at them. There are all these things that we're seeing now with respect to college campuses that's creating this climate of fear where students aren't allowed to just go and be students and enjoy themselves at this time in their lives where they're developing those social emotional skills that will allow them to be successful.
Try and do conspiracy theories, but there just seems to be this concerted effort to keep students from learning and learning lots of different things. There's this thing in Texas now where they were talking about not teaching world social studies, they would be local. I'm like, what in the world? And getting rid of world languages. I'm just like, and then all of the things with Harvard. There just seems to be this effort like, let's just keep people dumb. Let's keep them dumb and we will feed them the information. We're like Animal Farm. Let's just have Animal Farm.
I don't know if it's that as much as it is racism and individuals who are scared of the other.
Well, I mean, I understand what you're saying, because if the public schools were to get rid of all these things, rich people with means, they can put their kids in private schools. And we know that there's a whole thing with the vouchers and whatever. They can put them in private schools where they're going to get access to those things that are going to help them be competitive in the world. But that's not just a brown or a Black kid, because there are plenty of poor white people that also would be impacted by not having this equitable education in school.
I get what you're saying. And I think two things can be true. I think you can have individuals who prefer to have a less educated society because then they can make certain that they're feeding them the source of information that will allow them to act in a certain way. If you are busy hating someone that looks a different way, then you're not seeing as I'm pickpocketing you.
I'm keeping you in this emotional state and not in this higher order thinking state, because when you do higher order thinking, you start to question things and you may decide you want to upset the apple cart. But if you just continue to operate as an emotional being and continue to operate with the rhetoric, the violence, then great. I can go over here and do whatever I want to do and just be Richie Rich, and you can be dummies over here.
I agree with you on that. I take your point there. I think a couple of things that we're seeing a rise in hate speech. We're seeing a rise in anti-Jewish crime that is happening on a lot of campuses. You're seeing Jewish students being accosted and getting death threats. But at the same time, you're also seeing Muslim students who are experiencing the same thing. The problem I have is there's not equality when it comes to who gets to define or who gets to be compensated or made whole or feel safe on a college campus versus who doesn't. The person who is wearing a hijab is not getting the same love and respect for what it is that he or she may be feeling because he or she may be Muslim than someone who is of Jewish heritage and what it is that he or she may be seeing when there's a hate crime there. So there's this unequal treatment of both hate speeches. One is more egregious, it seems, than the other. That's a problem that I have. The second problem that I have with what we're seeing on campuses is we have to have space for debate. And here's what I will say about Charlie Kirk and what he did. I appreciate that he did go to college campuses to have conversations. And a lot of times he was having conversations with individuals who may have disagreed with him politically. That's where those conversations need to take place. They need to take place in an open forum where individuals can talk about their ideas and ideals of what it is and who it is that we should be as Americans. And we have to respect the fact that we have to allow individuals to be able to do that. We can't shut individuals down because we disagree with them. But there's this surge of intolerance, it feels to me, that's permeating throughout America at this particular point. We're not willing and or able to have conversations with people that disagree with us. And if they disagree with us, then we're shutting them down.
I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate that. Like I said, like Kirk, he built a career on monetizing inflammatory and divisive remarks. And he was also targeting marginalized groups that put real people, especially Black women, at risk. And that's the problem. Yes, you can disagree with me, but you don't put a target on someone's back. Why did you need to do that?
You're making the point of free speech versus hate speech.
Right, right. So there is a difference there. And I feel like, yes, you can have whatever feelings you want. And I welcome that. I really, I love a debate, but I don't think that it is a debate. You cross a line when you start to use words that put people at risk. And that was the problem I had. And I know people were like, well, he had a family, he had a whatever. And, I'm almost inclined to believe him when he called empathy a made up new age term, because I'm pretty sure Trayvon Martin and Dante Ross and Breonna Taylor, they also had families. That didn't stop anybody from digging into their past to see what they did to justify their murder.
Yeah, and it's amazing how we lionize the deaths of some and we minimize the deaths of some.
We justify it by going into their past. But if someone were to say, like you said, two things can be true, we say, okay, to go back to someone that said Black Lives Matter and the other person said all lives matter. It is sad when anybody dies, right? It is sad when anybody dies. I can say that the person that died was also horrid. And the things that he was saying was horrid. So two things can be true.
You have a First Amendment right to say what you want to say. You do not have a First Amendment right to say certain things that will incite violence with respect to specific people. And Mr. Kirk, for all the good things that some believe he did with magnifying MAGA and the beliefs of MAGA, I think it's also fair to say that he said some things that were not only destructive to individuals who were Black and brown, but individuals who felt that their lives had been impacted by a target that he put on their back.
Yes.
And so I think we need to be fair in terms of our honest and open criticism of everything that Mr. Kirk represented. One of the things that we're going to see is how those conversations occur on campuses. You hate that for the students who really, really love to debate. I was a poli-sci minor, so I really enjoyed having those robust conversations. It'll be interesting to see how it is that Republicans, and they are going to use this, they're going to use this to help galvanize the next generation of Republican leaders. I mean, I get it. I understand it. I think we need to be aware of what's coming down the pike. This guy has been treated as if he was a head of state. And to your point, that bleeds into media coverage and how violence in the media is covered. I wish that I could say the media has learned their lesson about how it is that we cover stories, how it is that we paint pictures, how it is that we allow certain ones to be considered martyrs and certain ones to be considered the salt of the earth and certain images to be portrayed, versus how we criticize and how we frame stories that oftentimes are harsh within individuals who do not look a certain way. I know you had some strong things to say about the media.
You'd asked me a question. I shared something with you. My friends go to alternative media sources. A lot of them broke up with the media during the midterms with Obama. I was just like, these people are no longer telling the news. You always know that the news was always slanted, like which stories got covered, which stories didn't cover. Like, that was always a thing. But for them to become entertainers instead of journalists, I was like, I'm done with this. I have a huge problem with Mika and Joe. And that was my go-to show. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm done with this. So a lot of people will turn to alternative sources. And I know that when the kiddos were growing up and they would say something, I was like, where'd you get that? You can't come to me with one source. Like, you go to the other parent. Don't come over here with one source unless you can cite three things, different sources. I really don't want to hear it. So they know to come to me with evidence. My nephew, all of them. Like, I'm just not going to entertain this nonsense. For people to just not question the media's motive, which is competing with everybody who's now a journalist. Anybody with an iPhone can become a journalist. And so we talk about legacy. I also think that the media is concerned about their legacy. And they're like, okay, so now we need to learn how to do TikTok. The media started to try and attract or compete with the iPhone. So I don't tune into mainstream media just because I question their motives. I question them trying to think for me. I don't need you to think for me. Give me the information, and then I will do my research and I will come up with my own opinion. I don't need you to do it for me because I don't think you're better than me or smarter than me. That's my problem with the media. I'm done with them.
I take your point on the media. Here's what I will say. The media's job used to be, and what the media's job is now. Fox is all about feelings. It's about how certain things make you feel. And for a lot of individuals, whether it's Fox, whether it's MSNBC, it's about how it makes you feel. I'll give CNN a pass for a second. It's about what you think versus maybe what is. And if you're being told certain things day in and day out, and those things are less than true or lies, and someone tells you lies repeatedly day after day after day, and someone presents you with the facts, then you have what you feel and what you've been told versus what is. And so the media in and of itself, from that standpoint, has become not necessarily for public use, but for profit. That's been a problem for probably the last 25, 30 years. We've seen corporations come in and we've seen them lead the news with stories that's going to needle. The news now is not necessarily to provide you with news. It is to get you glued on that channel so that they can sell you a product. And that product, whether it's advertising or whether it's something else, the longer you stay, the more they have the ability to sell you something. Even now, I wake up in the morning and I have a routine of going downstairs and I'll drink a cup of hot water, which is apparently this Asian thing. You have Asian culture that will drink a cup of hot water, just water, nothing in it.
Someone gave you, this is my concern with you. If someone said to you, you know what, John, if you drink this, you're going to live to be 112. You won't even research. You're like, oh, I'm about to drink this. Okay, well, it was poison.
Okay. So anyway, so I drink my cup of hot water and I turn on the news, and like you, I used to turn on MSNBC. Now I watch the local news, and like story after story after story after story is about some type of crime. And I'm like, damn, is everything bad? And literally, if you watch a 15-minute segment, I can guarantee you that 80% of that 15-minute segment is about bad shit that happened. And it's about creating this climate of fear. And it's like, guys, we have to do better. The media has to do better in terms of not only telling you what you need to hear, but telling you aspects of what you want to hear. The business model in terms of the media is broken. You have now Paramount that was acquired by Larry Ellison's son. And he has decided that he is going to make CBS more right wing. You had CNN that clearly is on some other bullshit with respect to how it is that they're covering the news. When the Charlie Kirk thing happened this week, I didn't know if I was watching CNN or Fox. It was over the top in terms of how they covered what had happened to this guy. You would think that he had not said one bad thing the entire time that he's been in the public arena. So I get how you say that your friends use alternative media sources to be able to gather bits and pieces of information. But to be fair, I do believe that there are certain outlets out there who do a pretty good job of providing quality reporting. I'll say that the New York Times can do exceptional deep dive reporting. The Wall Street Journal, in terms of their main coverage, not their opinion pieces, can do some great reporting. CNN at times can do some great reporting. NBC News can do some great reporting. That said, I do agree with you that you take bits and pieces of what it is that you need to be able to at least gather a surface understanding of what's going on. And if you want to do a deep dive, then you do that with augmenting it with other sources. But there is a problem in the news media where they believe that they do have to be fair and balanced. They do have to try to provide both sides. And I think Chuck Todd did a terrible job to his reputation when he tried to both sides issues. I love this version of Chuck Todd that we're seeing now on his podcast because I think it's more true to who he is. But I think the media has to get back to calling shit and not trying to make certain things look better or sound better than they are.
Then you don't need to make it sound anything. Just report the news. No one needs you to think for us. We don't need you to do that. I need you to say, hey, this happened. And if I think it's interesting, I love the fact that you brought up the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, things like that. If I read something or if somebody shares an article with me, I'm still going to go and do a little search like, I don't know about this. Is this a Facebook? And I always say, did you get this off of Facebook? Like, this is why it takes me forever to do anything because I'm questioning everything. Like, I don't know about that. Alexa, I don't know about that.
I'll say this because I agree with what you're saying to a certain point, but also believe that we are where we are because people do want to hear from people that think like them. And so you
don't
groups.
know that they think like you because you don't do enough research into who that person is. They're just saying one thing that resonated with you.
Everyone who watches Fox knows that the people that watch Fox sort of think like them. Everyone that watches MSNBC knows that those individuals are
probably a little less. I don't know. I just still question the why. I'm always, I drove my parents crazy. It's why? They're like, shut up. You should have named you why. I always say, well, why? Why do you think that way? And maybe the reason why their experience didn't even align with me and they just came to this conclusion and it had nothing to do with me. So why would I think like you? If our experiences were completely different and you said one thing that may have connected with me, now everything you say connects with me? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I think I take your point here that it's important to ask why. If the news media is showing you a specific story or a specific angle, you do have to ask yourself, why are you showing me this? What's the meaning behind you showing me this? Is there something that I need to be taking away from it? And I think that a good starter point for us as people and as consumers of information to ask the why. Why is this important for what I need to be accomplishing today? Or why is this important for me to become a smarter consumer of news, to be able to understand how it is that this pertains to my day-to-day? I don't think people do that enough.
Thinking requires effort. Emotion is just basic instinct. We are emotional people. Not you because you're a robot, but most people are emotional people. And it's easy just to go back to our basic instincts. And I know that I keep going on about education, but there seems to be some type of, directive or whatever to take why out of the schools. Like they don't want kids questioning anything.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do learn is having that intellectual self-defense. Meaning that is what you're doing. That's asking the why. Sometimes you can ask the why a little too much to where it's like, why?
You don't have the answer. You shouldn't have brought it up. That's my opinion.
I think we're in a precarious situation as a society because violence in and of itself, America has shown itself to be in some ways a violent nation. We were founded by individuals who were thieves and crooks from another country. And that's how this country was founded. And we have multiple wars that obviously were violent that we participated in. And you can't go about the 60s and not think about the violence. And then you go to the 80s in terms of the violence and of the crack epidemic and things of that sort. And so from that standpoint, violence is a line that runs through the veins of this country. I don't necessarily know whether or not we're able to separate ourselves from it. But I think one of the things that we have to do a better job at is understanding how all those pieces play together, whether it's violence in politics at our universities and what we're teaching our kiddos and how it is that we're teaching them to have conversations, or violence in the mainstream media.
It's easier to operate with emotions. And what is it going to take? What is going to move a nation to make them want to be more critical thinkers? That's a heavy lift. That's a lot of effort. When I can just turn on the news media and what was it, 1984, Brave New World, and I could just be fed that I don't have to think. You just tell me and I'm good. I love how these books have come to fruition, and like I always knew it was going to happen. At any rate, I'm back on track. I think that people would have to have a reason. And right now, there is no reason. There's just literally no reason for anyone to operate with higher order thinking and questioning when the emotional part is getting them what they need in the short term. So I can, even if it's against me, I can go to my group, my tribe, and we can gripe and argue and whatever about it. We're not doing anything, but we're really having lots of words. And then the other group can go and do the same over there, but nobody is bridging that communication gap because there's no reason to do it.
Yeah, I don't know if there's nobody that's doing it. It's
Who's
just that
doing
we're
it?
not aware. We don't know that yet. We do know the forces that we're dealing with right now. We talked about that a little bit today. We talked about the toxic polarization with respect to the language that we use and how it is that we frame certain conversations. And that language can lead to individuals feeling, as you said, marginalized, or feeling that they're lost, or feeling that something is being taken away from them. And so they act out and they do violent acts. We talked about the broken systems, or we're talking about politics, or how it is that individual believes that their votes count or matter, or whether or not they're being heard. And then the broken systems of the universities and college campuses, and individuals believing that what it is and how it is that they are learning can be called into question, or hell, even what it is and where it is that they're learning is of value to them, and us trying to in some ways sanitize what it is that is being taught in the universities, or whether it is and what it is and who it is that we're valuing as students as they attend these universities. And then lastly, we just talked about the mainstream media and how in some ways the radicalization of information, whether it's on the left or right, or whether it's from Fox or MSNBC, and how we're in these echo chambers and we're talking past each other and not talking to each other, and how that's leading to individuals feeling isolated and individuals feeling that their side has the right answer and their side is doing the right thing. I don't know where we go from here. I do know that all those things are not separate problems. They're all intertwined. And we have to understand that if we don't address them, we are not going to survive as a society. Every superpower has seen a demise in terms of their time to be on top. The United States is no different.
Yeah, and so
So I
I'm
don't
glad
know.
that you said that because I was thinking, yeah, we will survive, but it won't look the same. Right. And so maybe it is we abandon our place as a superpower and a leader, but we will survive. Just how do we want to survive and what do we want that to look like?
Yeah. And so we think about the inflammatory rhetoric and how that makes the polarization worse, and how that polarization can polarize us and polarize our political institutions. I have no idea where that leaves us. I do know that we're in a dangerous time, and that the divisions we're talking about right now are real. The decay in terms of what we're seeing with respect to our institutions is real and measurable, and that there are forces out there that are using this to their advantage. You mentioned this earlier. They're more powerful than some of us may want to admit, and a lot of them are making money off of it. These aren't simple problems with easy fixes. They're very complex, they're deep-rooted, and they're going to require some serious national soul-searching. But I do believe that recognizing this is the first step. Naming it is important. Calling individuals out is important, and understanding how they all work together is important. I think we can see how this is impacting our lives and our communities, and we have to decide whether or not this is who we are, and we have to decide it today. But I think the much harder question is, how do we pull us back from the brink to start having some of these difficult conversations? Our hope is that over the course of the next days, weeks, months, years, we'll begin to do that. Thank you guys for taking the time to spend having this conversation with us today. We know that you could be doing that anywhere. We're glad that you're doing it with us. While you're about today, while you're about this week, take the time to do something nice for yourself. And while you're at it, make the time to do something nice for someone else. Until next time, we'll talk to you.
Thanks for tuning in to another lively conversation on I Take Your Point. This podcast is a production of the SME LLC Media Group. All rights reserved. If you are enjoying the show, hit the subscribe button in the top right corner. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and check out past episodes. Until next time, take care and be well.